Joining us now is political analyst Rich Rubino. Rich, always good to see you. So we have seen recent wins on the left from socialist candidates. And while these politicians, they typically do have a very strong base, the concern is always electability in a general. So can this progressive wave carry? And how much of a political risk is this for Dems to really wholeheartedly embrace these views?
Well, so far, Democratic Socialists have only won in congressional districts that are demonstrably Democratic. So basically, it's a kind of an establishment center-left type of a Democrat, sometimes even a progressive Democrat, losing to the more to the Democratic Socialists. So they really don't have any problem in term. But the real problem I think they do have would be in a general election in a more moderate district, in a more moderate state, if a Democratic Socialist were to win. It's interesting. In other countries, socialist parties have been very formidable and have achieved success electorally. In the United States, they really have not. There's only been a couple of congressmen that have been elected. Bernie Sanders is the only Democratic Socialist really in the entire United States Senate right now. There are a few in the House, but basically it's been a word that Republicans have used to excoriate Democrats. So Democrats would have a problem in terms of any of these Democratic Socialists being elected in more moderate or conservative districts.
Right, and many say keep eyes on Michigan to see what the appetite is of the American voter on this one. On the other side, though, Rich, you have Republicans already gearing up to make many of these elections a referendum on communism. Do you believe that's a smart play when we know, of course, there is a distinction between socialism and communism?
Yes, there is. And Democratic Socialism, this actually does support some forms of capitalism. It's really an amalgamation between socialism and capitalism. For example, there are still many free market institutions under a Democratic Socialist government. So it's really not communism. But that being said, Republicans they'll try to tether the Democrat, and they'll say that this a Democrat running as a more moderate or a more conservative state, that they're basically the same thing as the socialists. You'll probably see Bernie Sanders and AOC appear in many commercials right next to that Democrat. They'll try to morph them in, if you will. So it is the problem. And as I say, socialism is considered a dirty word in the United States. As soon as you say it, people tend to freak out because they don't think about countries like the Nordic model, for example. They tend to think about Soviet Russia. They tend to think about China. They tend to think about North Vietnam, North Korea, Laos, countries like that. So it really is a problem for the Democrats, and the word socialism really has been something that Republicans have really used as a cudgel against them, and it's something that I think most moderate Democrats are going to do everything they possibly can to try to distance themselves from the appellation.
Right. And progressive Democrats, they could potentially pick up seats in the House and Senate come November. Do you see this having a major impact on party unity on the left?
I think that potentially it could be something that really would put some trepidation in the part of Hakeem Jeffries. Some Democratic Socialists have said, for example, that they would not support somebody for majority leader that accepts corporate PAC money. Obviously, Hakeem Jeffries, I think he sees the political winds working in favor of the Democrats, and he wants to be the Speaker of the House. So we need basically, assuming that the Democrats have a narrow majority, he needs every solitary Democrat just about to vote for him for Speaker of the House. The other problem he has potentially is that there could be a Democratic Socialist running against him in his own congressional district in 2028. We saw this with two relatively progressive Democrats losing their own primaries. So he potentially could be next. And there were some people that were yelling at one of the rallies of one of the Democratic Socialists that won, "You're next, you're next, you're next." So it really is a delicate balancing act Hakeem Jeffries has between propitiating the Democratic Socialists on the left and trying to get the support and trying to really prop up some of the more moderate and conservative Democrats that they need if they want to have hegemony over the House of Representatives.
Right. Let's head back to Maine for just a moment, because Graham Plattner, he campaigned on similar progressive views, then dropped out of Maine Senate race, somewhat disgraced. Do you see the fallout from his scandals impacting this wider movement, considering his campaign was defended through some pretty serious allegations?
It's definitely a black mark on the progressive bloodline of the Democratic Party because they basically recruited him. I think that Chuck Schumer and the establishment of the Democratic Party wanted Janet Mills, an establishment center-left Democrat, relatively popular governor of Maine, as the nominee. Instead, she was wildly outraised by Graham Plattner to the point that she had to actually drop out before the actual primary ballot. So it really is a black mark on the part of the Democratic Party. But that being said, on the progressive wing, but that being said, it's still relatively early. And because he dropped out the day that he did, Democrats have till July 27th to try to pick a successor as the nominee of the Democratic Party. And I think that if you look at the polls, some of those Democrats, like Troy Jackson, for example, who was the former Senate president, who actually represented Aroostook County, Maine, a very conservative part of the state, the really northern part of the state, in the United States in the state Senate, he's actually has a 5-point lead right now over Susan Collins. I think Democrats are hoping that this was done early enough that Democratic voters that voters in the center specifically will look at the candidates and they will not see Graham Plattner on the ballot, but rather they will see the independent Democrat that's running against Susan Collins.
All right, Rich Rubino. Always look forward to your analysis. Thank you, Rich.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.